Let's face it, sometimes no matter how many monster books you flip through, you just can't find exactly what you're looking for. And that brings you into the wonderful realm of home brewery, because you can make exactly what you're looking for. That perfect monster that will inspire your next game session and bring a sinking feeling of dread and terror to your players. Because that's what it's all about, isn't it? Scaring the life out of our players' characters with claws, teeth, weapons, and spells. Hi, I'm Lucar, and on this channel, I share my nearly 30 years of Game Master experience so that you can run amazing games that your players will love. And today we're talking about 14 monster creation mistakes that you should avoid. Homebrewing your own monsters can be tons of fun, but it is also filled with pitfalls. Now, before I jump in, I want to let you know that The Secret Art of Game Mastery is now on Audible. I don't know about you, but I do almost all of my reading via audiobooks, usually while I'm in the gym or doing chores around the house. If you're a new game master, perhaps feeling a bit overwhelmed by everything involved with running a tabletop role-playing game, or if you're a veteran looking for new tips and tricks, I think you're going to love The Secret Art of Game Mastery. My team and I distilled our century of accumulated Game Master experience in this one easy to read or listen to book. It's filled with practical advice that you can immediately apply to your games. And if you grab the companion books, The Secret Art of Preparation and The Secret Art of Note-Taking, you'll get the same templates that I use when designing and running my own games. I'll throw links down below where you can pick up The Secret Art of Game Mastery on Audible and in hardcover and PDF. Number 1, half-baking the concept. A good monster starts with a good concept, and a good concept requires inspiration. If you're not inspired to create something new and amazing, then you're probably better off just grabbing something out of a book. But once you're inspired, you want to create a strong concept for your monster. Get an idea of what the monster looks like, where it lives, the terrain it prefers, the lore that might be around it, or a cool spell or ability that defines the monster. Aim for something unique that fills a hole in the monster ecosystem. Number 2, skimping on the appearance. One of the things that inspires me the most to create D&D adventures and run games in general is seeing cool monster artwork that inspires me to want to use said monster in an adventure. I then go off and write an adventure or two that features this monster or a group of monsters. Considering how much the visuals of a monster can get us amped up, it's critical that the appearance of your monster be carefully considered. Now, you might have a good idea of what it looks like right out of the gate, but if you don't, then I suggest going online and browsing through the thousands of monster artwork that can be found on different sites where artists upload their work. This will serve to inspire you and give you ideas for what your monster might look like. And then you might sketch out your monster to the best of your ability or write some read-aloud text that can be used at the table. Either way, you want to be able to communicate your monster's appearance to the characters and players so that it might inspire them as much as it does you. Number 3, not considering the environment. Every creature, every monster lives somewhere, and sometimes they tend to live in environments where they are especially suited to survive and have adapted to. And many times these adaptations play into the monster's appearance and abilities. If you want to build verisimilitude into your monster design, I suggest researching real-world creatures and the unique environments they live in. This will allow you to see how actual creatures adapt to their environments and how their environments are reflected in themselves. And if you're going to have a creature that has an ability that is contrary to its environment, make sure you have a reason for why. And I suggest avoiding the cliched justification of, oh, it's just magic. There's only so much you can play that card before the suspension of disbelief is like totally shattered. Number 4, ignoring the lore. Even if your players may never learn the lore of a monster, it is extremely useful to develop it nonetheless, even if it's just a few sentences. You see, knowing the lore of a monster helps you, the game master, roleplay that monster when your player's characters encounter it. And a monster's lore can also affect other parts of the game that happen before the scenes in question. However, some players love lore and love learning about monsters. And in some game systems, there are mechanics built in that players can use to learn about monster lore, such as recall knowledge in Pathfinder 2. So if you never consider a monster's lore, you'll be shortchanging your gameplay. Number 5, not understanding the mechanics. I feel like this is a Captain Obvious moment, and it really should go without saying, but I feel like I have to say it. There are just lots of people trying to, and they don't understand the mechanics. Anyway, if you don't understand the mechanics of your game system, the one that you're using, in so much that they relate to monster design, you're probably going to be hard-pressed to design a good monster, at least from a mechanical point of view. You can come up with an amazing concept, appearance, and lore, but the stat block, the mechanics of your monster are going to suffer greatly. Your system's Game Master Guide should have a chapter that discusses how to homebrew monsters. I know that D&D does, and Pathfinder 2 does as well. I feel like it's a basic part of Game Master instruction, so most systems really should have it. It's really just on you to crack that book open and study up. Furthermore, there are almost always online tools for creating monster stat blocks that you can use that makes things tons easier and almost makes it so you don't have to think about the math. You just punch some numbers in, and then the website and the spreadsheet just takes care of business for you. Number 6, shortchanging special abilities. A monster that only slashes with its claws, or hacks with its sword, or does something else fairly mundane and has no special abilities or spell casting or anything like that, is a monster that you should probably never have created in the first place, because there are already so many boring monsters like that in the books. If you're gonna take the time to homebrew a monster, make sure that it has something really cool that it can do. And this should be a special ability that it can use during an encounter with the characters, probably during combat if your games tend to feature a decent amount of combat. The fact is that most monsters exist to be encountered by players, and many groups tend to fight those monsters that they encounter. So make sure that your monster has something unique and awesome that it can do in battle. Now, whatever special ability you give your monster, it should be something that will challenge the characters. However, it should not be something specifically chosen to negate a character's abilities. I've heard of game masters doing this sort of thing, and not only is it probably very unsatisfying to players, but it also feels like it's a bit mean-spirited. It's like, aha! Your wizard can do this really cool thing, but my monsters can shut you down, so now you suck. Also, make sure that your monstrous special abilities make sense according to the environment that it lives in, the special adaptations that it might have, or skills that it might have acquired if it is an intelligent creature. By the way, if you're finding this information useful, please give me a thumbs up and share this video with a fellow game master. And if you're not already subscribed to my channel, why not subscribe while you're at it? Don't you know that my subscriber count directly influences my personal self of worth? You don't want to have me feeling worthless now, do you? Number 7, ignoring balance. Most game systems have guidelines around creating balance. That is, they will help you mechanically design a monster that is balanced for characters of a certain level. Do not ignore this. If you come in hot with a monster that is far too difficult, characters will feel totally helpless against it. Or if you come in too weak, there will be no challenge for them. Now, of course, there is always a time and a place for characters encountering a monster that is absolutely more powerful than they are, and they have no chance of defeating it. And a beautiful steamroll where characters trounce a group of monsters with no effort at all can be amazing fun from time to time. The point I'm trying to make is this: understand how to create balanced monsters in your game system and design your monsters intentionally. Don't just throw together a stat block willy-nilly and hope for the best. Know the mechanics and know what you're aiming to achieve. That said, the monster game design mechanics for some systems can be very complex. So a simple trick to help you double check your work and make sure that you're in the ballpark is to compare your monster with an out-of-the-box monster of the same level. This will allow you to make sure your monster is in the general neighborhood of where it should be. Number 8, not justifying movement. Okay, so your monster can burrow underground, but when I look at it, I see a bulky creature without claws. Or you say that your monster can fly, but it has no wings and it's not a magical creature. Yeah, this is probably another Captain Obvious moment, but your monster's movement needs to make sense according to its form and size. A creature that doesn't live anywhere near water probably doesn't have a swim speed. Flying creatures need to have wings or some other feature that allows flight. Creatures with burrow speeds tend to be worm-like or at least streamlined and have claws. Also consider speed. Creatures without legs or unintelligent creatures such as undead and oozes tend to move slower than average. Faster creatures tend to be smaller or have longer legs. But more than just making movement make sense, consider ways that you can use a creature's movement to make the game more interesting. Moving without provoking attacks of opportunity, blinking in and out of existence so that it is harder to hit or target with spells, skating along the ground on a cushion of air to avoid difficult terrain, walking on water. Just make sure that whatever your monsters can do makes sense according to its terrain or ecology. Its movement needs to be justified. Number 9, not considering offense versus defense. It might be a temptation to consider offense and defense on their own as though they were separate entities. However, they really both work together and should be balanced in relationship to each other. A monster that has exceptional offensive capabilities should probably have weaker defense. This is your proverbial glass cannon. Monsters whose defenses are very high, armor class and hit points, should have less effective offensive capabilities. These are your tanks. Or you might have monsters that are balanced among both offense and defense. But the point is that there must be an intentional design consideration that balances offense and defense relative to each other one way or another. Furthermore, monsters that have exceptional defenses should still have a way to overcome those defenses. This presents a puzzle for the players during a combat, a challenge for them to overcome. And in the same vein, monsters with good offense should also present a way for intelligent creatures to mitigate some of that offense. Now, whether you go the route of building for defense or offense should really depend on the style of combat that your table enjoys the most. If you prioritize offense, then you're more likely to have fast-paced combats that are over fairly quickly. If you prioritize defense, then you're more likely to have longer combats that are drawn out and take up more table time. My personal opinion, there are few advantages to having longer combats. I would always trend toward prioritizing offense over defense and aiming for shorter, fast-paced combats. Even if your group really likes combats, that doesn't mean that each combat should be longer. You can have shorter combats and just have more combats in your game session, which I think is probably more fun most of the time. Number 10, nonsensical ability scores and skills. There is a cliche or trope or whatever that I read all the time in books that is quite frankly starting to get annoying. It's when the author describes a character as agile for his size. So basically you have a fat or bulky warrior who is extremely dexterous. And okay, that might be a thing from time to time, but it seems way overused. Now, the way this translates to your monster design is that your monster's ability scores, strength, dexterity, wisdom, intelligence, whatever your game system uses, should make sense for the monster's size, form, and function. Massive creatures are rarely fast, but they're usually strong, and they're probably not very stealthy. Ask your local paladin, they can tell you. And smaller creatures tend to be more agile and physically weaker with less stamina or constitution. Yes, we're looking at you, halfling. A monster's intelligence should reflect its ability to reason, and wisdom shows a creature's survival instincts. Creatures that don't talk and behave instinctively tend to have lower charisma than those that can communicate. Furthermore, skills should make sense for the creature. A melee monster will be trained in athletics, and a troll who has learned spellcasting will be trained in arcana. I definitely suggest that you give your monsters skills that they can use either in or out of combat, depending on how you plan to integrate the monster into your game. However, don't bother giving them skills that they'll never probably use. Number 11, building only for power. Dragons are powerful creatures in Dungeons & Dragons, but they're also very interesting. They have a mix of abilities that provide different threats and defenses that make players think. Their breath weapon is a heavy hitter, but smart players can find spells and items that mitigate some of that power. The breath weapon is also a limited resource that can't be used every round. The ability to fly makes them very dangerous to fight at low levels, forcing players to be creative. Dragons also have a lot of hit points and high armor class. They are epic monsters, and everyone recognizes the danger of a dragon. However, they're not just powerful, they're also interesting. The trap when making a monster is to only build it for power, when you should instead be prioritizing making your monster interesting and fun to run at the game table. Number 12, over-buffing defense. When you go crazy on a monster's defense, you run the risk of turning your combats into slogs. So, a good monster with a high defense should be a challenge to take down, but it should not be completely invulnerable. If the monster is hard to hit, it should have fewer hit points, unless you plan on running a 6-hour combat. If the monster has a lot of resistances or immunities, it should be easier to hit and have lower hit points. Or it should have a weakness that the characters can find and exploit, and one that is not beyond their reach. For instance, if you know none of your players' characters can deal cold damage, giving a monster a weakness to cold is really not going to offset anything. Also consider that active defenses are more interesting than passive defenses. A monster with a high armor class that is hard to hit is far less interesting than one with regeneration that the players must figure out how to overcome. Just don't make it fire because everybody tries fire. Gonna make it something different, right? Number 13, making attacks boring. If you're a player and all you can do with your character is swing your sword or cast the same cantrip over and over again, you're probably in for a very boring game session. And if all your monsters can do is slash with their claws or swing their big axes, both you, the game master, and your players are probably in for a boring game session as well. Monsters with special abilities are more fun to run and more fun to fight against. And don't overlook battlefield control. Wall spells, the ability to create difficult terrain, abilities that move the enemy around against their will, and the like can all be interesting and fun challenges for players. By the way, this is one of the reasons I hate counter spells so much. It makes the game less interesting. Instead of having monsters and players who can cast spells, they just get shut down. Their special abilities are negated, and then we're back to slashing with claws or just swinging big axes. Number 14, not reskinning. I feel like there is a tendency to believe that creating a monster from scratch is the best way to go. However, there are tons of existing monsters out there, and the chances are that one of them resembles very closely the homebrew monster that you are conceptualizing. So wouldn't it be easier to start with that monster and its stat block and then just change it as needed to accommodate what you have in mind? If you want a burrowing desert creature that deals acid damage, start with Aramoraz. Replace its cold immunity with acid immunity and replace its fire damage with acid damage. Boom, you're done. Number 15, overdoing it. One of my biggest gripes against high-level monsters in Dungeons & Dragons, especially legendary ones, is that their stat blocks span pages. Like, how in the world am I possibly supposed to run all of that at the game table? It might be really cool to read and visualize and think about, but it's not practical. So be careful not to give a monster so many cool abilities that it becomes unmanageable and practically unplayable at the game table. And this especially holds true for spellcasters. They don't need 5 cantrips, 5 first level spells, 5 second level spells, 4 third level spells, 4 fourth level spells, and 3 fifth level spells. You can never use all of those spells. Your caster's gonna be dead in like 3 rounds or something. Instead, pick a handful of spells that you think will actually get used. But that's just what I think. What monster creation mistakes have you seen that we should avoid? And don't forget to check out The Secret Art of Game Mastery on Audible, hardcover, or PDF at the links below. Now, if you'd like to learn how to create combat encounters your players will love, watch this video right here. And until next time, happy game mastering.